last night, and somebody picked.
We have the approval of the minutes. I like to say, fly, Eagles, fly. Have the approval of minutes from our January 8th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second. There's a motion by Mr. McLean, second by Mr. Melendez to approve the minutes. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Motion is adopted. Before I get started, we have an email here from Mr. Mechanic. Says, I am ill and will not make the board meeting today. Thank you. I hope he does not have what I had last meeting. He starts to feel better soon. Mr. Carino here? No. Not here yet. Okay, so we'll move on. Presentations. The Regional Transit Feasibility Study. I'm sorry. Public input. I'm sorry. Hold on. Before we do that, I skipped a part of it. The public input on the agenda. I have one person. Is this Tarny Sabia? I know I messed that first name up. Good morning.
Good morning, board members. So my name is Taryn Sabia. I came to speak on the regional transit study as an urban designer. For those of you who may not know what an urban designer is, it's the city scale of architecture. So we study cities and how they function, as well as regional areas. And I just wanted to speak to the regional transit plan that you're going to hear a presentation on, and ask you to consider a few things as you hear that. One being, what are the goals of the plan? What are we really trying to achieve by doing this, and its outcomes? And when we make this type of investment, what is the return that we're going to get in order to achieve those goals? There's a few things that I'm concerned that I feel are missing for us to know whether or not this really is going to be the best option for our community, and that is a land use study to accompany it and an economic development study, so that we can truly see what that return on investment is. Example cities like Cleveland and the Health Line have generated $6.3 billion in economic development for a highly rated BRT line that's located on an avenue, and they did it for under $200 million. So when we look at that return on investment and those initial costs, it's really important to make sure that we're achieving the goals that our community has really set forth for our future. And if we're dealing with population growth, making sure that we're putting that growth along the line where it's most appropriate. So I just urge you to think about that as you hear the presentation, so that we can really consider whether or not this is addressing all the needs that we have. There's no one silver bullet, but we can certainly get a return for what we're willing to invest.
Mr. Kemp, you recognized.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank you, Taryn, very much for coming down here. I have deep respect for the work that you do in design up through USF and with the designing School of Design at USF. And I just like to, I have a couple, I was kind of taken aback because I asked about the return on investment in this study, the ROI. And I was a little taken aback because I thought that they were going to talk about things like what happened at the Cleveland Health Line, that was going to be some kind of consideration. But I was told that the return on investment is merely a fair recovery calculation in this. And I was kind of shocked because I've looked at a lot of studies from around the country and I've never seen that. Do you have any insight into that?
Sure. I mean, typically we would look at, what you're going to get at the fare box as fare box recovery, not necessarily return on investment. Return on investment would be what we are looking to see in expanded tax base through economic development. So those opportunities along the line. There's several ULI, Urban Land Institute studies that show that return on investment, as well as Reconnecting America and the Center for Transit-Oriented Development has done a number of studies from systems around the country to show what the economic return is for those investments. So, there are proposals right now out in Nashville and stuff where systems might cost even up to $5 billion, but what they're looking at as an economic return far outweighs that. Dallas is another example, paying for its system 3 times over in the economic development that it generated for over 100 miles of a light rail system. It's really less about the mode in terms of whether it's light rail or true dedicated right-of-way BRT. The function is the same, even though the mode is different. If you look at those two systems and really compare apples to apples of true BRT. And so that's one of the things that's also important to weigh, because you can't really, for the way that the study that you have, a presentation coming on is set up, it's not really apples to apples. We're not looking at a true dedicated BRT and can honestly give that a comparison to a dedicated rail line. If you have a true BRT, again, the Healthline example, Curitiba in Brazil is one of the biggest models of BRT and how it's supposed to function. And if you have that, you can absolutely compare it to a rail line. And it is often less expensive because you're not having to put in tracks. But again, that function is the same. And so we see that same return on investment. Development follows a sure thing. And what that dedicated lane or that dedicated right-of-way provides for developers is a sure way to know that something is going to be here permanently. 1 in 10 development projects are successful, and it takes 2 to 3 years for one to happen. So if we put in a system that isn't dedicated, that could change, and development isn't going to follow it.
So if you could just for a second, I know that you have it on the top of your head, and I think most people here might be familiar. It's really the most famous, I guess, or well-known BRT system in this country, which, by the way, is not in any way rated even gold standard, which surprised me. There's not one in the U.S. They actually have gold standard, and we don't have them. They have them in other countries. But the Cleveland Healthline, which is a very excellent BRT system, which is at street level and has been incredibly successful. But what was the cost for it, the length, and what was the generated economic development?
Let's remember we're in public comment, okay? So make it short, please.
What they have said has been generated in economic development in about the past 6 to 8 years is $6.3 billion. And the initial cost of that system was around $180 million. And they did use New Start's funding for it.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's the only name I had on public input for this morning. Thank you very much. Let's get into the recognition. Mr. Crino is here. He's an outgoing board member, and we're going to recognize him this morning. Brian Crino was appointed to the HART Board of Directors on February 16, 2012 as a representative of the mayor of Tampa, Bob Buckhorn, and since then was reappointed for an additional 3-year term in 2015. He held several positions on many HART boards, such as the Finance and Audit Committee, the Tampa Historic Streetcar Board of Directors, and the Claims and Litigation Committee. Mr. Crino, we want to thank you for your service. Public service is one of the most rewarding things that you could ever do. I hope you feel that way after your time here. We know that you're not done. We know you're a busy person. We want to recognize you this morning. I think we have something for you, so I'm going to come up there and present it to you, and then you can have a few words. There it is. It's a crystal bust.
But it's a bust and not a bust, as my assistant told me it was going to be.
Thank you very much for your service.
Okay. First, I just wanted to say this has been a wonderful experience when I was first appointed, because I gave the mayor a mouthful on transportation. He said, great, here you go. You're on the HART board. And I heard all sorts of horror stories about what it was going to be like, and I'm going to say that it was the exact opposite experience from what I had heard. The board and the organization was in the middle of a fantastic turnaround that I think they've accomplished, and I think that we've got a wonderful team and a wonderful staff and an extremely well-run organization here at HART. I also think this board, for the 5 years I've been on it, has been just a wonderful example of how people with different political perspectives, different personal perspectives can get along and function and make an organization run very, very well. And I really, really, truly hope that HART does get to play the role within the county and the regional transportation system that it should. And I'd call on the folks in the county commission and other bodies of politics around the state to look at HART as an example of an organization that's run very, very well and could truly do great things in transportation if given the chance.
And now we'll get into the presentation of Regional Transit Feasibility Study. Scott Pringle. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Scott Pringle with Jacobs Engineering. I'm the consultant project manager for the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. I do appreciate the comments that we received this morning about the plan. One of the things that I really most appreciate about the way we've designed this effort is that we've allotted a significant amount of time to vet the concept with the community, and hearing these concerns and these comments that we're hearing today, as we're going to hear them through the next several months, are incredibly important to making this the best project we possibly can for Tampa Bay. So I thank all those comments that we received today, and we're going to continue to look for those moving forward. So today I have the opportunity to present to you an update on the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. This is the final presentation to the HART Board before we begin our public outreach efforts. We've had input all through the first phase, but we're having this sort of concerted, designed, intense focus of public outreach to sort of vet these concepts from starting here in February all the way through fall of this year. Leading up to today's presentation, we did have the opportunity to present to the Tampa Bay Area Transportation Management Leadership Group, the TMA, as well as TBARTA. Both of those groups took votes and endorsed the concept that we're going to talk about today, and specifically endorsed taking this concept as in its draft form out to the public to receive that input, as I just discussed earlier. So, getting started, my mission specifically was to answer question number one. So when you think about building premium transit, and by the word premium, we're talking about something that is in a dedicated lane that gets by congestion. You have to figure out first what the project is, how much does it cost, and who's responsible for operating it. My job primarily was identifying that first project and how feasible that project was to construct. And I recognized that the Tampa Bay area and the Tampa Bay area leadership has, the hard lift on trying to identify how to move a project forward towards implementation as it comes to and reflects to both cost and who owns and operates it. So the plan purpose was to define a regional vision for premium transit in the Tampa Bay area, but not only define the vision, but also identify how we can get started on building that vision. And we're defining that starting point or that starting project as that catalyst. And we did this by strictly following the technical methodology that is designed and provided to us by the Federal Transit Administration. So we used all the evaluation criteria that are prescribed by that guidance, and we've maintained that objectivity in all the evaluation criteria throughout all the milestones that we've completed to date. So the plan was originally identified not to be another study, and it's not a replacement for long-range transportation planning. We know how important that is, and we hope that this plan complements all those future efforts. And the catalyst is, again, a place to get started on that vision. And one thing that we have been hearing quite a bit, is sort of a misconception over the past couple of weeks, is that this is a one-and-done proposition, that what we're recommending as far as a rubber tire vehicle on the I-275 corridor is the only thing that we can expect for Tampa Bay. That is absolutely not the case. We have that vision, and we recognize that there are a number of really great projects in that vision, but based on our technical effort, the facts that we identified through this technical effort, we feel that this Catalyst project is a great way to get started on building that vision. So that vision, as I mentioned, is identified here. You can see all the projects in those blue lines. There's over 21 different regional projects. And when you look out to 2040, you can see some of the benefits here of how that overall vision network touches Tampa Bay, including more than half the jobs by 2040 and half the population by 2040. Once we defined that vision, the next step was to identify, okay, where do we think that project, that Catalyst project is, and what type of modes could be operating on that Catalyst project? Now, we looked at a wide range of different transit technologies, ranging from ferries to steel wheel, whether it's light rail or commuter rail, and rubber tire, whether it's bus rapid transit or autonomous technologies, which is where we really think the transit industry, as well as the transportation industry as a whole, is headed. So using that vision, paring that down to a couple of key corridors that we think could be that catalyst project, we identified these 5 alternatives here. Rubber tire on I-275, urban rail on I-275, and 3 different modes on CSX, which was both rubber tire, urban rail, and commuter rail. Now, the difference between urban rail and commuter rail is simply the fact that we have more stations and the frequency of service is more frequent. You're looking at least 15 minutes during the peak hour, where commuter rail would be something a little less frequent, fewer stations. In this last round, in the last step here, as we developed that draft concept, we looked at a number of evaluation criteria. And these, again, are specifically prescribed by the FTA guidance. We looked at employment and population density, new riders, annual ridership, environmental benefits, and cost effectiveness. We have a lot of those details of that analysis will be provided on our website, which is tbregionaltransit.com. And what we found is both corridors have quite a bit of merit when you're looking at all those different evaluation criteria. A couple really stood out, specifically looking at rubber tire on the I-275 corridor or an urban rail solution on the CSX corridor. But we sort of ran into a wall when we started identifying those overall project costs. You can see the cost here in the I-275 corridor ranging from $2 billion all the way up to $5 billion, depending upon the mode. Where along the CSX corridor, it was ranging between $340 million all the way up to $1 billion for a 9-mile segment. And what that did is that put us in the position of being out of cost effectiveness as prescribed by the Federal Transit Administration. They would like to see your project have a cost per trip annually of $10 or better. And you can see the numbers here. We were way outside that realm. The closest we came was rubber tire on the CSX corridor. So at this point, we recognized we had an issue. We had a problem. We needed to go back and look at the numbers and really begin to innovatively think about how can we get to a solution that'll satisfy our mission, was coming up with that catalyst project that is competitive for federal and state grant dollars. So we did that by basically taking that cost effectiveness calculation, as you can see it here, and asked the question, well, we know what the ridership is. How much can we afford on the capital side? What is our overall capital budget, and how can we value engineer those different concepts on both corridors to get closer to that overall budget? And the reality is the best way to sort of value engineer those 2 corridors is to begin working with our existing assets. So along the I-275 corridor, what is our existing asset? It's the highway and the roadway network itself. So was there a way to begin integrating a transit solution into that envelope to reduce our overall project costs? Same thing on the CSX corridor. What's the existing asset that's out there today? Well, it's the freight rail corridor. Can we look at repurposing the freight rail corridor to reduce those overall project costs and get us closer to that cost effectiveness metric? Based on that value engineering exercise, what we've identified are 2 concepts. The first here is the rubber tire solution along I-275. And this is a combination of shoulder running lanes, median running lanes, from all the way from St. Petersburg up to Wesley Chapel, which is a 41-mile corridor. Now, running on the shoulder, what we're anticipating looking at is actually hardening the shoulders, widening the shoulders, striping them, and separating them, which will be a dedicated transit lane for bus rapid transit or a rubber tire vehicle. It could be an autonomous vehicle in the future. And this is actually recognized as a dedicated lane by the Federal Transit Administration. So you can see the corridor here. I'll walk you through the details and through the segments. We had over 21 stations along this 41-mile segment. Overall travel time between 80 to 95 minutes, going all the way from Wesley Chapel to downtown St. Pete and stopping at all those 21 stations. The reality is that you wouldn't actually operate the service in that manner. You might have one service that stops at each one of those stations along the corridor, but you're going to have express routes throughout that, which will greatly reduce the travel time and that convenience factor to attract riders to the overall project. So starting in downtown St. Petersburg, there's an opportunity to partner with the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority, who's looking at a dedicated BRT lane on the First Avenues. So in downtown St. Pete, again, utilizing what's available to us to reduce our project cost. We can use those lanes to circulate in downtown St. Pete, get into the I-275 corridor, and run on those painted, separated, dedicated transit lanes on the shoulder of the interstate up to the greater Gateway area. Now, when we get to the Howard Franklin Bridge, we obviously have a major obstacle. Crossing the 7 Mile Bay crossing and all the costs included that, to build a new transit structure or tag on a structure to the existing bridge was very cost prohibitive. So at this point, what we have worked with the department is looking at their plans to modernize and rebuild the Howard Franklin Bridge. They're looking at toll lanes that has a minimum design speed of 45 miles per hour, which will be managed by those tolls. So the concept here is we would slip out of those shoulder running lanes into those toll lanes, which would be with other traffic, admittedly, but it has that benefit of that speed that we talked about, and it allows us to significantly reduce the project cost getting across the bay. Now, when we get into West Shore, we have the opportunity, especially because of the flexibility of looking at a rubber tire vehicle, to have both a direct connection to an intermodal center in West Shore, as well as a direct connection to the airport. And it's from that point in West Shore that we would be in a median running dedicated lane between West Shore and downtown Tampa. Along that corridor, there's an opportunity for at least one elevated station at the West Shore area. The other stations, I think we want to continue to review those and consider those as we move forward, whether they're at grade or within the median. Obviously, just like the earlier public comment, if we can be at street grade, again, the flexibility of being rubber tire, we can actually get that vehicle out of the interstate envelope so that it's more walkable, more friendly, and becomes truly an anchor to the neighborhood community that it serves. So now when we get into downtown Tampa, we can come off the interstate again, make a connection to the intermodal center, and just like we did we're looking at in downtown St. Petersburg, there's an opportunity to take Tampa, Florida, 2 one-way pairs, dedicate a lane within the existing envelope, which gets us underneath the downtown interchange, another major engineering obstacle along the corridor. Get through the downtown interchange, take Tampa, Florida up to Florida, Nebraska, get back onto the interstate, and at that point we can operate in those median dedicated lanes all the way from downtown Tampa up to Bears. And at that point, whether we want to continue those dedicated lanes to make a connection to Wesley Chapel, what we've looked at is the traffic along that portion, even during rush hour, moves relatively well. So there's an opportunity to reduce project costs by getting into the general purpose lanes north of Bears. But when we get to Pasco County, certainly at 56 and at 54, we would want to look at those shoulder running lane concepts as well to get around those congestion points, because there's a lot of congestion getting off at those interchanges. So this took basically a $2.3 billion rubber tire project in the interstate and reduced it to about $1.3 billion for the shoulder running concept, and the opportunity to actually leverage a partnership with the department on the I-275 corridor has some additional benefits. For example, there might be an opportunity to use some of the roadway FHWA dollars that are being invested in the corridor to the benefit of the transit vehicle, which would further reduce the overall project cost, which brings us down to $380 to $455 million project. Now, how this generally gets funded through the federal and state grant program is you're looking at 50% of that total project cost, capital cost, being grant dollars through the Federal Transit Administration, matching 25% to the local 25% to round out the entire project cost. And we're looking at about $7 million annually to operate this 41-mile service. Now, we took the exact same approach to the CSX corridor, and we looked again, what is our existing asset, looked at that freight rail corridor, and what we can do instead of double tracking the entire corridor is refurbish that single track that's out there today to make sure it's passenger rail ready. put in some sidings and include all these stations. And by doing that, and I apologize, so that's the infrastructure, but we're also looking at a vehicle that can operate on an active freight corridor, which is either a diesel or an electric multiple unit. It has the Federal Rail Administration approval to operate in an active freight corridor. And by doing those two things, looking at the vehicle technology and the infrastructure, we're able to reduce that project cost down to $490 million to $620 million. Again, same breakdown when you're looking for the federal and state grant dollars, 50, 25, 25 mix, and a $12 million operating cost to run that service for the 9 miles. So as we looked at these two projects, both of them have a lot of merit. And with that value engineering, we think that both of those projects can be competitive for federal funds. But when we look at some other elements, like the cost per trip, when we look at the I-275 corridor, we're now under that $10 per trip mark that I mentioned up front. And we're, in both cases, the I-275 corridor, we're going to look for a few elements of right-of-way just to locate stations in those communities, like I mentioned, at street level. However, the guideway itself would require no right-of-way. It would operate all within the existing envelope, whereas the CSX corridor, you would still have to negotiate an agreement with CSX to either lease or own or operate on that corridor. So our time to construct is approximately 5 years for a rubber tire on the I-275 corridor, and a little bit longer, mostly because you're going to have to identify the funding source, work through the new state's grant application process, and really I think the most time-consuming out of getting something built on the CSX rail corridor is working with CSX and getting that agreement to use that right away. You can see some of the additional elements here. Again, 41 miles, 3 counties for the I-275 corridor, where it's 9 miles in 1 county for the CSX corridor. Which brings those costs per mile down quite a bit for the I-275 corridor. We're talking about between $9 and $11 million per mile, where the CSX is $54 to $68 million per mile. I mentioned the operations in the prior slide. So between those factors that I just mentioned is really why we're starting to hone in on that I-275 rubber tire concept as that starting point, that catalyst. But just like all the comments that have been both in the media and a lot of comments we receive from the public, the fact is it does need to be where we can put it in a dedicated lane and meet the FTA standards, which says that the project has to at least have 50% more of the corridor in a dedicated lane. And we aspire to that, if not greater. When you look at actually between St. Pete and USF, we're looking at 60% of the entire corridor in a dedicated lane, and the other 11 miles that's not in a dedicated lane is in those toll lanes that I mentioned across the Howard Franklin Bridge. But we need to think very differently about this service. It cannot be the everyday bus that you see operating on the street. It's something that has to have that passenger amenities, the convenience, and the speed to really attract people, and again, be a great start, be a catalyst to start building upon this larger vision for the region. So it needs to be as fast as a train, have those passenger amenities, bypass congestion, especially when we know the congestion is the worst, by using those dedicated shoulder lanes for a lot less cost. And by reducing our overall project cost on the guideway, it does give us this opportunity to invest in stations. So we're not actually looking at stations that's just a bench with a pole in the ground and a shelter. We're looking at between $3 to $5 to $10 million investment in station areas into the station facility along the corridor, which falls right in line with the comments that you heard earlier today from the public comment. Developers are going to look, and economic development opportunities are going to look for permanency. And if you can put a facility in place, that station that can be an anchor to a neighborhood or a community, it definitely indicates that sense of permanency that will attract economic development and transit-oriented development around those stations. And we also have the opportunity to invest in future technologies. So again, by reducing that overall project cost, we can shift some of those costs or some of those expenditures towards making sure that we have the power systems in place for future electric vehicles and the communication systems in place to handle these new autonomous vehicles that we anticipate coming in the next couple of years. So this is a great start. I think this catalyst is a great opportunity to start building out that vision, but it needs to be supported and support all the other efforts that are ongoing today in the region, including downtown Tampa and the extension of the streetcar. There's a great opportunity for some synergies there where the two corridors may actually operate on the same Tampa, Florida a portion of the corridor. They can operate in the same lane, and we can leverage some partnerships there. So I ran through that pretty quickly. I'll take questions at this time. But before we take questions, just remind everybody that this is just the beginning of our community vetting process. We're going to start here in February, and we're going to carry that through the summer, at which time we're going to take all the comments that we've heard from the public, incorporate and revise the plan based on that input, and finalize that in the summer-fall timeframe.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We do have some questions. Start with Mr. McLean. You recognize.
Scott, first off, thank you for the brief right in front of you. Just a question more for clarification, or at least on my part. On slide 8, you outlined the 2017 total project capital costs. Where did those estimates come from? Was that derived by Jacobs, or did that come from somewhere else?
Derived by Jacobs. We use the Federal Transit Administration's standard cost category spreadsheet. Again, because we were, my mission from the onset was to find a project that's going to be competitive for this federal and state dollars. I mean, we use the federal guidance through and through. I mean, to a T. So even when developing those cost estimates, we followed their guidelines.
Okay, and they set the base for all the other calculations throughout the rest of the brief.
Absolutely. Yeah, everything that we've done is based on the FTA guidelines.
Mr. White, recognized.
Thank you. Well, I recognize that I'm just one vote on this board and on the other boards that I sit on. But for me, we have taken one step in the right direction with respect to looking at BRT. The rubber-tired BRT technology makes so much more sense to me than rail. Just like with previous attempts to try to take steps with respect to mass transit, though, the real debate is how do we pay for it, right? I'm not sure how things would work over on the Pinellas side, but let's look at the Hillsborough side and the Pasco side. Hillsborough is incredibly unique in the sense that we have very few municipalities for a county of our size. We have huge swaths of unincorporated Hillsborough County. Pasco has a few more municipalities, but obviously they have some pretty wide swaths of unincorporated county as well. So to the extent that the counties are asked to engage in this, how are we going to get people from places like Brandon and Ruskin and Sun City Center and all of those unincorporated swaths of Pasco County, really even some of the municipalities up there that would be far removed from this? Any thoughts on how to get those folks engaged?
Well, I think what this board did with Mission Max definitely needs to tie in and can provide that service from the unincorporated areas to connect into the spine. And again, I reiterate that we've established that vision, and we hope that the intent is to continue to build out that vision, which will give that coverage to the region. But admittedly, a regional service is not going to perform as best as it possibly can if it's not served by good local transit, which I know HART's been really working hard on to try to get the streamline those efficiencies. So connections to Mission Max, we took that as part of consideration. I think that's a big component of it. In Pasco County, connecting to Wesley Chapel, I know Pasco County's been looking very heavily and intensely at the State Route 54-56 corridor, and has a lot of transit conversations regarding the improvements to that corridor. So again, another opportunity where that semi-regional or local service can connect directly into this sort of first spine.
And with respect to to how to pay for this, that's down the road, obviously, right? We really don't have anything coming into focus yet with respect to that conversation, right?
Correct. My mission was to identify the project, how feasible it was, and the costs associated with it. And I recognize how difficult the conversation about funding is, but I think that's still to come.
Okay.
Mr. Melendez, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pringle, thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for your hard work on this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Just a couple of questions, and then I think just a point or a clarification. Would if the CSX line were used, would that be considered was the assumption in the study that it would be a shared piece of infrastructure or a wholesale purchase or lease of that?
We, under instructions based on information that we received from CSX, did assume within our cost the purchase of the corridor, and it's really modeled after what we saw in Orlando. And that was information that Mr. O'Malley gave me, what they felt comfortable was providing cost publicly for the purchase of that corridor.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to get clarification on that, given obviously the unfortunate news recently in South Carolina. And I think that how that proceeds is a very important consideration as well. Whether it would be a shared freight commuter situation or a wholesale, and we just used it exclusively. The other point I wanted to just discuss briefly was I love the way you presented the information, the catalyst recommendation slide. I'm looking at right now where it begins with the length, 41 miles for I-275 rubber tire versus the CSX urban rail at 9 miles. It looks like, from I think it's been pretty clear to everyone that's seen the information. I know this is the first time we've seen it, but that the BRT option or the rubber tire option is significantly less in operating costs. And it's interesting because the actual length is 41 miles for the BRT, but it's only 9 miles for the urban rail. So we're looking at 7 million in operations versus 12 million. And it's interesting if you were to, kind of equate those from a distance standpoint or distance covered and people served. It looks like if you were to expand out the cost of the rail to 41 miles, the cost would probably go up even more, I would assume. Or if you shrunk the BRT down to 9 miles, the cost would also be reduced even further than than it is now. It looks like by a factor roughly of 4. So it is interesting. I mean, I think and this is really kind of a message for the public. When you're looking at these some of the numbers, make sure that you're looking at that 41 miles of rubber tire versus 9 miles of cost. So, and was there a reason, I guess, and if you covered this, forgive me, but so the 9 miles of urban rail on CSX was really defined by the CSX corridor, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kemper recognized.
Thank you. I'd just like to let everyone here know that on the TBARTA meeting 2 weeks ago, I was the single TBARTA representative who did vote not to move this on as a catalyst project. I think it's important for us to really look at this much more closely, and particularly in Hillsborough County, where about 3/4 of it goes through the land here. Already and I don't have the article here, although I held it up, it had been printed that morning. When I went to the TBARTA meeting, there was a very, very long article in the Tampa Bay Times which editorialized against this project as a catalyst project. It made excellent points, and I will try and get copies of that to everyone so that everyone can start to read and understand that. I have this also to pass out to everyone. This is from the Tampa Bay Business Journal on Friday. Again, it's an editorial against this as a project. This, I do not believe, is a good catalyst project, particularly for Hillsborough County. I'd like to point out a few things about this, and I think it's interesting that you talked about the 9 miles versus a 42-mile corridor. We really should have had apples-to-apples comparison to this. And I'll start out by saying this. It's not about modes. It's not about rail versus BRT, because I'm fine if you want to look at 42 miles of BRT corridor, but that corridor needs to be at street level, not on an elevated expressway. And every best practices study, the ULI, everything across the nation shows that that's the case. Taryn Sabia's point's well taken. We really need to relook at this and look at the value of our investments. If you look closely, I mean, I actually think that this study is more a study that shows you why the 9-mile CSX corridor performs better, amazingly, better than a whole 42-mile corridor at the expressways. If you look here, CSX 9 miles will have 3.3 million riders and 1.5 million, if you could put that up, if we could get that slide up, 1.5 million new riders. Can we get that slide up?
Identify the one. Is it step 2 you've got up? Okay.
Yeah. So if you look, you can look at the CSX. You get 3.3 million riders on a 9-mile piece of track. You get 1.5 million new riders. You go to 41 miles on an elevated highway, and you get 3.6. So you only get like 300,000 more a year. But you even get fewer new riders on 42 miles. Additionally, this study did not include any component, and I'm shocked because really across the country I pulled a lot of studies. I don't see this as being true on any of them. This didn't have a land use, and that's so important here in Hillsborough County to integrate a land use study. It didn't have an economic development part of it. I think that this was a real loss in terms of moving forward on this. When I asked about return on investment, which across the country is looking at economic development and investment, it turns out that our return on investment is simply fare bucks recovery. I would say the value in this is we need an express bus system to serve the much smaller regional commuting need, and that can be done without any capital investment in stations or any of that. We should be moving an express bus, as we are through Hillsborough County. That will come later in this meeting, from Wesley Chapel to the airport. That makes sense. Not build any kind of infrastructure on an elevated expressway where it makes no sense, brings no economic value, and doesn't do what we need to do. We could do our express buses. I think the state should be paying for that because it's a kind of inter-county service. Do limited express with limited stops through Hillsborough County under HART. PSTA could do limited stops from downtown St. Petersburg to Gateway to the airport through Pinellas County, and not be investing in a lot of infrastructure that's not going to bring us value. I think we need to have a lot more work done on this. There's going to be a lot of negative pushback on this. I think that you're going to have transit people out there saying this is not what we need for a catalyst project. I like the Florida-Tampa part of this. I think we need to look at the CSX rail much more closely because the value is really shown in this study. And I think in terms of connecting the region, not investing $400 million in infrastructure, just simply putting express buses up and having them serve very limited stops, it makes sense. It's cost effective, it's a good taxpayer investment, and that's really what makes sense for moving our region. The plan as we have here, I don't think is anything new. We've seen this plan over and over again. I would have predicted 2 years ago that this is the presentation. FDOT and Jacobs Engineering has been putting this plan out for several times now. And despite what you may have heard today, this is not in any way gold standard BRT. This is kind of express bus plus. Operating in mixed traffic in most cases. I've read I assume we've used a protocol that they're using in Minneapolis, and I could go on about why the shouldering lanes, which I support, and I support BRT, it's just not this BRT plan. It's not congestion proof. Express buses are fine, but this simply isn't the transformative project that we need here in Hillsborough County. It's really important for us in Hillsborough County to take control of our transit fate and to really be looking at how we can best invest our dollars, because it's going to come down to our dollars paying for this. Beyond that, the plan fails to do the most critical thing we need as a catalyst public transit project. It fails to support land use objectives and support the region's economy and quality of life. A major transit investment should be a catalyst for residential and commercial development, as they've done in all the communities across America. walkable, livable neighborhoods along the corridor served by congestion-free premium transit, a short walk from your home and business. That would really change things, and that is really what we need to look at. We cannot accomplish this by the I-275 corridor by using it. It's just too vast. It divides the environment adjacent to it, hindering walkability and bikeability. And the interstate is not a place for a transformative public transit project. It's not the project we need. This exercise has brought us value. It's highlighted several things, including the value, I think, of the CSX, including I would like to move the Tampa, Florida, locally forward, the BRT that's there. But we really need to just go up to the expressways and just look at a simple express bus system. So I wanted to get that out. I urge you to look at closely the Tampa Bay Business Journal, the Tampa Bay Times. I think they really understand it, and I don't think we have really done the work we need to do in looking at transit and looking at land use and looking at economic development and looking at value. So I just wanted to express that to the board, and I really don't think this is a project that we should be moving forward on.
Staff, would you pass out the information that Commissioner Kemp has, please? Thank you. Mr. Suarez, Councilman Suarez.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pringle, I know that you've done a few of these presentations already, and appreciate the fact that you all put this together. Let me ask you a couple questions. What's the elements that are included in BRT?
This project in particular?
No. What are the elements in BRT? I mean, I know you're an engineer, you know all this stuff. So what's the BRT? I'd rather than me say it to you. You tell us.
Bus rapid transit should have the ability to bypass stations and provide a more express service connecting.
Did you mean bypass stations?
Yeah, it skips stations instead of stopping every block.
Right.
So it has the opportunity to have faster end-to-end travel time. There are two components of bus rapid transit. There's arterial bus rapid transit that operates in mixed traffic as well. And there's dedicated BRT, which is what we're talking about here in the concept, which is a lane that is dedicated solely for the purpose of that transit vehicle use. The vehicles generally have low boarding, so it's easy to get on and off the vehicle. They have ticketing machines at stations to allow people to buy tickets prior to getting on the bus, speeding up the overall time at stations. And generally, they have a unique branding to them, so they stand out from the rest of the local bus service.
Okay. Are there other elements that you're not mentioning yet, or have that are parts of it, that can be parts of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stations is a big element of it. I'm not quite sure what in particular
you didn't mention once about transit-oriented development.
Right. So, and the public comment earlier before, I absolutely agree with. It's less about mode and it's a lot about permanency. You know, we had the opportunity quite a few years ago to meet with a whole forum of developers and ask them the questions: what about transit-oriented development? You know, how can we stimulate that? What is the development community looking for in a transit system in order to be attractive? And permanency was the number one thing they said. And so when we're looking at this guideway, admittedly it's not steel track. So it doesn't have that type of 100-year permanency to it. But we're able to invest in these stations that are, like I mentioned before, they're not, benches and the signposts. They're actual facilities which clearly indicate permanency, which will help with that economic development factor.
The reason I'm asking about TOD, when I first got on HART, we had a committee dealing specifically with TOD. It's something that I had pushed for and we had created. Now, one of the things what I find ironic is that you're talking about what you call BRT. I have to say it's not really BRT in my mind. It really is an express bus, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that if you do a true BRT that includes a dedicated lane, it includes those stations that you're talking about, but it also includes the transit-oriented development around those stations or a part of those stations, I think you're going to find that. And this is a question that an answer for Commissioner White's question, which is the funding of it. What you see in TOD in, let's say, Cleveland, those Cleveland stations are primarily owned or in conjunction with a private company and they lease to the private company to develop it. And then when it's developed, that rent and that lease that goes into actually maintaining and providing the operating dollars that you need. So one of the problems that we have with this particular plan is that you don't have that as an aspect of it, because you don't have as many, and again, I don't know where you're going to put these stations at specifically, if they're going to be running along the shoulder. You don't have as many of those opportunities when you have it along the expressway as opposed to at street grade. So that's an issue that I have with it. I think that what you've developed here is great as a regional express system. There's no problem with that. I think Commissioner Kemp mentioned that. I think that we need to look at it from our standpoint, the kind of cooperation and land use that we need to do from the city side, from the county side, and in addition, be able to cooperate with some of the businesses that are out there, because we're not going to be able to develop the kind of ridership that is estimated here without having that on there. Ridership on bus rapid transit, and if you look at the Cleveland example, and the health line was mentioned earlier, you'll see that they have not only developed that corridor was empty of a lot of different amenities. There were a lot of properties that weren't being used, a lot of them that had been shuttered and did not have any activity around it. Once they put that together, not only did it become a successful BRT type of project, it also outstripped their subway system. They have more ridership above ground than they do below ground. Now, the subway system had a lot to be desired, but at the same time, the pattern that they created there also created dollars that went into it. And their board and their activity was much more extensive than what we're talking about here. And I think that we need to work with FDOT to provide some of the things that they want, which is long distance, quick transportation from Wesley Chapel to St. Petersburg. I have no problem with that part of it. I think that what we need to do, though, is that we need to figure out how we're going to get at grade, whether it doesn't matter whether it's a north-south corridor, east-west, we're going to need at least two of them in order to make this thing work. And for us, we need to kind of look at how FDOT can help us get to that point, as opposed to just doing what people in Wesley Chapel want to do, which is come into Tampa, go into St. Petersburg, maybe go to the airport. I think that we're not thinking about how it's going to affect us as a county in the right way, or us as a city, because right now I think your corridor isn't going to touch on a lot of the lives that we already serve, and I think it's going to make it a much more difficult prospect for us to sell as an operator to people that use our system. We need to have it quicker and through our downtown traffic, or excuse me, not our downtown traffic, through our traffic, to get to downtown or to get to the airport or other places, separate from what we're trying to do with the express. So I don't have a problem with the express portion of it. I do think that we need to think of this, and I hate that you keep calling it a BRT. I know it has some elements of BRT. It's sort of like calling Metro Rapid BRT too. There's parts of it that are BRT, but there aren't really a real BRT. And I do think it's kind of funny, Mr. Pringle, that in here, every single one of your pictures, for the most part, are those that are at grade. The stations are at grade. I mean, I was looking through it. I wanted to make sure I was right, because I don't think that this is BRT has not been used in the way that you're looking at it so much. I think this would be a new thing for what would be called BRT. And so most of the stations, if not all of them, that you showed in your pictures are all at grade, because the development around it helps not only define it as permanency. I think that's extremely important. The stations are much more important than just the road. And I think that you'll see the studies will bear me out on that. But secondly, and I think most importantly, it helps to pay for the operating of the system itself. And I don't think we're doing that in this study. And again, that was not probably your direction in this study. And when we look at all of these studies, sometimes it's the instructions you're given as opposed to the study that you've given us. And I think that's where the issue is for me, is that your study was about making it as quickly from the longest areas as opposed to how it integrates into some of this other stuff when it comes to the land use. So I really believe that we need to look at this a little bit with a jaundiced eye. I think that if we do move forward in to make a recommendation or to agree to this, I think that it has to have significant changes in terms of the BRT at grade. I think that's what we need to look at when it goes through not only the city of Tampa, but those urbanized areas of Hillsborough County, or else we're really not going to get the kind of connections we need so that cities like Temple Terrace or areas like Brandon are going to be better served by us as a transit agency. So I appreciate what you put together here. I think that it needs a lot of work in terms of what we need it for, but thanks for the study. Thanks. Thank you, Chair.
And just a point of clarification, and your points are well taken. Thank you. Of the 21 stations, 19 of them are planned to be at grade.
No, I get that, but it isn't about just a station. It's a station in conjunction with the route. So if I've got to get onto 275 to get to the next station, all right, I'm not doing myself any good as opposed to if I have a regular BRT at grade with a dedicated lane, making sure that I can go from not point A to point Z, but from point A to point C, meaning that I've got to be able to travel along that area that makes sense to me. I mean, some of the successful transit agencies across the country have, these stations that are well developed. They're there to serve not only the needs of the transit user in terms of just getting there and getting on and off a bus, but in terms of the things that are there, the amenities that are there, the things that surround it. And you're not going to do that if you're closer to the interstate as much as you are at grade and in a neighborhood. To me, that's really the successful BRT model that I would like to have us emulate, and not this model. Again, we can talk about semantics all day long, but that's not my view of what BRT should be and what it should be for us. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilman Donahue, you recognize.
It pays to go late in the question and answer session because it's reduced my questions considerably. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It definitely gives us a lot to think about. One of my questions is, if this is supposed to be the fastest way or the easiest way, by getting off of the interstate, by getting off of 275 and going to a station and then getting back on, I agree that at street level, that's pretty rapid, whereas I know myself trying to get off and on. So I also question the use of 275 as opposed to another street. However, when I begin to envision that as a native of Tampa and I start to think of those different routes, with the exception of Adamo Drive, I can't imagine the property you have going north that would not require some serious purchase for stations as well as those dedicated lanes. So I have a feeling that what's going to happen next is that public comment is going to drive this discussion because of what people see as what's in it for me. As far as in it for City of Temple Terrace, I can see where we could definitely make it to one of 3 stations that are easy for us using Mission Max. But I, looking at the other areas, it seems to me that we chose 275 because it's just already there, and it's like low-hanging fruit. What is the next step? Where do we go with public input, and what do you need from us?
The next step is, I mentioned before, is we're going to go out to this community vetting process. So that'll start here at the end, towards the end of this month, and carry on through the summer time frame. Just to the point that you just mentioned, to allow the community to discuss the benefits of the plan, really tell us what they think about it, and it's at that point we're going to incorporate all that input and finalize the plan in fall.
So how do you plan on reaching the audience?
We have a number of different techniques. Social media, obviously, we're going to have a lot of all our information is putting up to our website, which is tbregionaltransit.com. We're going to have street teams that can go out to things like farmers markets and ask people there. We have what we call a speakers bureau, which will be a group of volunteers that'll go out to homeowners association meetings. The idea is to go where people are already gathering rather than requesting them to come to us. We've found in the past that that's the most beneficial, including preference surveys on the website and the like. So a number of different venues we're going to use.
Okay. And are you taking care of this? Or are you expecting any of our staff to do this?
We are primarily responsible for doing this. We've had some informal conversations with HART staff. If there's an opportunity where we could team up with HART staff, that would be great. If not, we're prepared to do it on our own.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Berman, you recognize.
Thank you. I'll make this brief because a lot of the comments have been said already. And I'll echo what I said in the TMA meeting when this plan was introduced, that I think it's a great first start. And I'm really also hoping that there is a lot of negativism that builds up on this before we have time to really build on it. You know, I think that's where we're at. This is a start, not the end. And we need to, through the TMA, through TBARDA, through the HART Board, I think all of our comments he's heard today, and they'll build on this. As I understand, in the PD&E study, a lot can change even from that. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. If we're the next step after this effort would ideally be entering into the federal program, which is the Capital Investment Grant Program that FTA runs, either as a new or a small starts project. A new starts project requires 2 years of environmental compliance and engineering, and then 2 years of design before a grant is awarded and then goes to construction. Small starts, there's technically no time limit, although they do recommend showing significant progress within 3 years on both the environmental compliance and the preliminary engineering.
Okay. Well, this spine is only going to be as good as the connections that go into it.
Correct.
And I think that's where HART comes in. And we got to make sure all those connections are in their plan and the TDP and all these other plans we have so that we can start to build a connectivity. I mean, Commissioner White and I mean, there's almost 1 million people that live outside the city of Tampa limits right now. And these people have very little transit, very little. And they're going to need to see that this benefits them, and that's where the connections come in. That's where HART comes in. And so I think we're at the very early stages. I think Commissioner Kemp's comments are valid. I think that everybody wants rail, and they probably thought that this plan would come out with rail in it. Well, it does have rail, and I think the rail project will probably work along parallel to the BRT project. But I think I'm kind of a glass half full person. I think we need to stay positive and really try to build on this and not deep six it before it's really had a chance to go out in the public. So, that's my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Blanton, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. Thanks again, Mr. Pringle. And I just want to acknowledge, I definitely am impressed, and I think for the mission that you were given, I think you and Jacobs did a fine job of delivering results and data. And for me, the data, should drive and will drive how I move forward. I am really interested in digging into the TOD side of this as it relates to Tampa. And I just want to say, from the perspective of this big picture, 30,000-foot level, given what we know in the article that was passed out acknowledges a couple things, an anti-tax sentiment in the public. What does the plan really solve? I'm really excited about where transit-oriented development has worked in other areas and looking into that and how it can work for Tampa. And a big part of that is the private sector. And I think one of the realities we're going to have to look at are concepts like something that's transformative and partnership. And so from a funding standpoint, I think that, the recommended alternative, again, we can talk about the details, but I think the recommended alternative is definitely preliminarily very cost effective in my humble observation. But again, I just want to stress that given the climate that we're in, I personally, both as a board member and a taxpayer, would really like to see our agencies and agency leaders come together on something that we can move forward in that New Start, Small Starts program. And I guess I'll just finish up with just a quick question, Scott. is it fair to say that where the local Tampa agencies can provide leadership to do things to make a new start, small starts application more effective and competitive, that's what we should be engaged in? Is that a fair? I know that's kind of a general question.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, the most important thing and the biggest hurdle that the Tampa Bay as a region will face going into the next steps into the federal process is defining that local funding strategy. Right. Because without that local funding piece, you're never going to be awarded the 50 or 25% from both the federal and the state government. Right. Now, there is time. You don't have to have that strategy completely locked down as you enter into the federal program, but after the first 2 years, especially in new starts, you have to have those commitments in place for that local funding piece.
Thank you. And just a quick, thank you, Scott. Just a quick comment. You know, in my capacity as a board member, as long as I serve, I do intend, given what I know now, to really do my part to explore and look at, you know, having dialogues, having conversations about partnership and funding related to what you're talking about. From again, not advocating one way or the other, but just looking at if we're going to do a new start, small starts application, how we can be the most effective and how we can win. You know, in other words, if we're going to do it, how we can win. Because like you said, you did say that's our biggest hurdle.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Kemp, you have some additional comments?
Yes, just a few. I just want to again point out that this is not bus versus rail or BRT versus rail. This is about doing an express bus system with simple stops, actually moving things quickly through and not investing hundreds of millions of dollars in elevated kinds of hardening of a mixed system that serves no one. So it's not bus versus rail, it's elevated. Even if you put a rail in the elevated, I'd be talking about this. It's that versus street grade, real BRT choices that you can make, and that are much easier to make, not on an expressway where the value of a lane is so much. We can do it way better and get that economic development, get that transit-oriented development by not doing this on an elevated expressway. It's the wrong solution. We'll find that out. I think what we really need here is some presentations in the future. We need to have some information about transit-oriented development and how it works. I have a bevy of studies from other places and where they also did strategic land use as part, before they even started about looking at what transit there was opportunities out there. The ULI has done critiques of this in other places. I think we really need to look at those kinds of solutions for HART to explore here in the future.
Okay. I think a lot's been said, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to call on our executive director to tell us where we go from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point, as Mr. Pringle mentioned, the next step is public outreach. Pursuant to our contract with Jacobs, it outlines the responsibilities of the public outreach and the working with the regional agencies, the MPOs. However, currently HART has numerous projects that are getting ready to go out for public comment and community outreach, including our February service changes, the 275LX that you're going to hear about here in a few minutes, our BRT analysis with FDOT. So it would be helpful for staff to have a clear understanding of where our board stands on moving this to public outreach, just as TBARTA and TMA voted. So we have a clear understanding of the expectation of staff involvement in the next step of this effort, along with Jacobs on the public outreach side.
Any comments?
I'll make a motion that we move forward to public comment with this proposal.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second motion by Commissioner Merman, second by Commissioner Melendez. Any questions?
Discussion, if I could, Chair. I don't have a problem with it going to public comment and going to the next step. I think that in terms of your question, Mr. Seward, is that we need to look at how the people that we are currently serving are going to be affected by this particular plan and to emphasize that at grade or at the folks that we serve, make sure they do it. Because remember, this is a premium transit feasibility study, and it is a huge undertaking. It takes people from places outside of Hillsborough County all the way to places outside of Hillsborough County, and how it's going to affect our ridership and the people that we serve. That, to me, is the most important thing. So I would love for the staff to be there and to be involved at the public comment portion of it, to look at how that's going to affect our current ridership and how it's going to affect our current people that we serve. That's the biggest emphasis for me right now.
Commissioner Kemp to the motion.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be voting against this. I don't think this is ready to move forward at all, and I don't think that we'll be presenting the public with a plan that is very serviceable in terms of understanding what we could do with them. I think it's a mistake, because I think we're going to get lots of negative feedback and lots of disappointment. And again, not because this is BRT, because this is not really BRT, but doesn't really do any of the things that we set out to think about when we first did this. So I don't think it's ready for that. I think there should be further discussion and consideration, and that we shouldn't be moving this forward.
Any other comments, Councilwoman Donahue?
I could agree with Commissioner Kemp. I don't think we're ready to put our staff time, especially since in light of the other things that we know that we're working on, that we're not ready to give we're not ready to take a stand. And I would like to postpone that piece of it until we have been apprised of other information, until we have a better idea of where we stand on this. I would hate to send staff out there to ask a question of a remote possibility, which right now I think is what it is.
So are you making an amendment?
So I plan to vote against the motion.
Commissioner White, I'm sorry, Mr. Melendez, you recognize. Mr. Melendez, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think Mr. Pringle noted that the effort wouldn't require our staff. So if we have a vote, I would be voting to move forward with public comment under with the understanding that it's going to be a minimal impact to our staff. I mean, they're the consultant, and we have a contract with them. And on that note, I think moving forward is tied to a contractual obligation, if I'm not mistaken. So I think we would need to weigh the implications of telling a consultant to, who's planning on doing work, if we're going to tell them to stop, does that have implications? And that would be something I think we should consider.
Commissioner White, you recognize.
Yeah, I think I find myself in the same camp as Commissioner Kemp and Councilwoman Donahue, but probably for different reasons. I had mentioned funding sources and how are we going to pay for this. We can spend a lot of time planning for something that maybe we ultimately can't afford. And if that turns out to be the case, then, even this first step is just an exercise in futility and could end up being a waste of resources. So I don't think this is ready for prime time with the public until we can have at least a sampling of at least high-level conceptual funding sources. So for that reason, I think I'll oppose taking the next step as well.
Okay. Mr. Hart, you recognize.
Thank you, sir. I think I agree with Mr. White. We circle back to where the public comment, or where his comments started with regards to how do we pay for this, and then we go to the ideas that were put forward by Taryn and. And with regards to a land use study, or going forward with taking this to the public without really looking at how a transit-oriented development can interface with the existing land use plans. So I'm not sure it's even a land use study. I think that Tampa and Hillsborough County have a very, currently adopted 2040 comprehensive plans that spell out where they want to see transit-oriented development. Additionally, though I'm not as familiar with the comprehensive plan in Pinellas County, I can see that the concept here is to run this up the middle of an interstate in an area that's basically currently fully developed at about 6 units an acre, and pretty far from any areas that would be able to see any rise in the tax base that could potentially pay for this system. So Again, I agree with the comments that it's not about mode, and it would be nice to build on what we have here and get something we can all agree on out to the public for comment, but it doesn't seem like it's ready.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Suarez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification on the motion and what the request from our staff was. Mr. Stewart, that this is just because this is going to be going forward anyway. It's just whether or not we can get ourselves involved in terms of the public comment, correct? Correct. All right. I just want to make sure of that because this is going to be going forward regardless of whether or not we're involved. So I agree with the sentiment of everyone that is against this as a concept because I'm against the current concept too. Having our staff there, I think, may or may not be important. I just think that that's the only thing that we have to remember. We can't stop this project yet. I mean, this is just about whether or not we involve it. So I just wanted to clarify that, Chair.
Commissioner Kemp.
One thing I was
asking.
asking.
To the motion.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I was asking for further information before anything like this got moved out so that we could add to that process. But second, I'd like a point of clarification. So if it's not us who moves this forward, who has the authority to do that then? Why do you say it goes without us?
I'm asking
what drives that?
The question was to Mr. Seward in terms of clarifying that.
Yes,
and I don't know if you did or you did not.
Contractually, it will move forward to public outreach. That is the next step pursuant to the contract.
That's the only point I was trying to make.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand. So that is part. So I don't think. So why are we even discussing it?
That's why.
Because, but I do think that it's this as it is framed, and it strikes me as that we are. I feel all along that any of the transit agencies, and I'm on every one of them, has not been able to impact in this project either in discussion behind closed doors or in a public way to shape this project in a way that would be valuable for our community. So I'm kind of frustrated about that, and I don't think it should be moving forward in a way that will be frustrating the public. So I'll say that I will vote no, but. That means that our power to shape this is very frustrating.
Let me ask a couple of questions here. Okay, I have some concerns about the study itself. All right, but I also feel that the public should have to see the entire picture and let them make comments as to what they feel is right and what they feel is wrong. For us to chop it off here today and say no, we're going to go back and take out, move out, shift things around, does not give the public, the citizens of Hillsborough County, the opportunity to make their comments, whether it's good or bad. Thank you. Appreciate that. Whether it's good or bad. Having said that, I heard the comments from Commissioner White as to how we pay for this. We have been talking about paying for transit issues on this board since I've been here. So eventually we're going to have to get to the point of, do we bite the bullet of looking at the possibility, even though it's an anti-tax sentiment, how do we meet the needs of the citizens of Hillsborough County? I'm not talking about Pinellas, I'm not talking about Worcester Chapel. I'm talking about Hillsborough County, whether you live in north, south, east, west, whether you live in East Tampa, West Tampa, South Tampa, Brandon, Baum, Wildmama, whatever the case may be. Mr. Pringle. I'm bad with names. This is not a concrete, finalized document, am I correct?
Correct.
So we send this to the public, we hear what the public has to say, they come back and say, you idiots, you made a terrible mistake, go back to the drawing board and do it over again. This can be done that way, am I right?
Correct.
Okay. We are not talking about funding aspects yet, am I correct?
Correct.
But we got to get there eventually.
Correct.
And it's not your responsibility to start talking about those funding aspects, it's this board's responsibility to talk about it. Okay? Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, thank you. So the issue is, I understand the concerns that you have about not wanting to take it forward, but the citizens of Hillsborough County should have the opportunity to talk about the entire project. I think they should have that opportunity. So we have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Berman, second by Commissioner Melendez, Mr. Melendez, to move this forward to our HART staff and Mr. Pringle and his staff to have public comment.
I just have clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
So, in light of what Mr. Seward said, we are going to dedicate HART staff to this, or this is coming?
No.
That's really my question. No. I want to make sure that HART staff is not being given the job of doing this public outreach. Mr. Seward,
come make your comments again, please.
Yes, sir. No. The HART staff is not given the responsibility to do the public outreach. However, my concern has been from the onset that our involvement shows HART support. So if we have a street team with HART t-shirts on or shirts on, identifying them as HART representatives, showing the maps and the catalyst projects, there is a sense of ownership from the public that will come with that. I have no concerns or issues either way. I need to understand exactly what the HART board direction is, if that is okay, that there is ownership at the HART staff level and in turn at the HART board level of the projects that are going out there, then I am fine to assign staff. My concern has always been the alignment of HART staff, the recognition. Simply sitting out there with a HART staff shirt on and a placard shows that HART supports this. And I wanted to ensure where the board sits with this prior to making any further commitments past what the contract is asking for.
Ms. Menendez.
Briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go on record as saying I definitely would I think share Mr. Seward's concerns and sentiments. I would not want to see any HART staff going out lobbying or advocating for anything, number one. And number two, I don't believe that that's a consultant role as well. I mean, we're looking at two alternatives. They're going to go out and present data and findings, and they're going to elicit input. That's my understanding. That's my, that is how I would, that's the spirit of what would be in my vote when I vote for this. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on the motion by Commissioner Murmas, second by Mr. Menendez? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
All those in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand. All opposed to the motion signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. What's next?
Doesn't mean anything.
Okay. Well, you're still not in Dodo land. All right.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So, just to clarify, I guess the motion that failed, can you read it back to us, please, just for clarification?
The motion that failed was for this to move forward to the public comment. Public presentation.
So if that's the motion, I guess my question would be, are there any contractual implications that was the board directing staff to stop the actions of the consultant that had planned on doing
That's my next question of staff. You want to come forward, sir?
That's probably a question for you, Dave.
Who drew up the contract? Well, comments are here, Victor. The question is, now that the board has said they do not want it to go further from where it is now, what obligations or what legalities or what happens now with the contract?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Al Burns, Director of Procurement and Contracts, HART. I'm not prepared to answer that question at this present moment. I have the contract called up on my laptop, but I don't want to knee-jerk a response at this time, if that's okay.
Okay. Can you look at the contract, get with the executive director, and email the staff, email the board as to where we are with the contract? Am I saying something wrong here, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Chairman, I would just suggest that would be an excellent suggestion, that we get Mr. Burns to provide an update of information. As I hear the debate today, I don't think there's a decision not to get public input. There's a decision not to give the impression to the public that this board recommends the two catalyst projects. So the information gathering could go forward under the contract, but just not under the articulation currently provided this board.
Okay. All right.
I understand.
All right. Very good. We move on. We're going to switch agendas, position on the agenda here. The next we're going to bring up is the creation of the new limited express route 275XL. That was fun.
Good morning, board members. I am Philip St. Pierre, Manager of Scheduling Services in the Service Development Department. And I'm here to discuss about the 275LX plan that we've been developing. A little bit of background about this route. This route was developed during the COA and TDP process when prior to Mission Max. It went out to the public process and vetted through the public through those plans. The original routing of that route in the 275LX through that plan, let you guys get all settled. Sorry. All right. The original routing of that route was from the university area to downtown to the airport, and that was known as the 275LX. We were unable to implement this route in year one of the TDP due to funding constraints. So service development staff got together to try to figure out a way that we could implement this route sometime this year or next year. The possibility exists that we could use the Route 51LX funds to help fund this route if we extend this route past the county line. So we've been working with our FDOT partners and discussing with them a plan on this, and we've been collaborating, and they're supportive of this plan. And so we presented it to the Legislative and Strategic Planning Committee, and now we're here today at the board to ask for the approval to go to public outreach. So an overview of this route. It's a merger of what the 275LX was in the TDP process, in the COA TDP process, and a merger with the Route 51LX that is currently operating today. So the northern portion of this route from Wesley Chapel to the Lowe's Park and Ride would be merged into this new 275LX route. So it saves the service from New Tampa to downtown. The proposed alignment is estimated to have over 200,000 riders per year annually. Through this plan, it would continue to be fully funded through FDOT through the Urban Transit Corridor Program. The current and future regional connectivity, we currently connect with the Route 54 at the Wiregrass Park and Ride with our Route 51, but this provides an hourly connection because we would run this route hourly from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And I'll discuss those alternatives of that routing alignment later in the presentation. And we would also use the newly FDOT created Wiregrass Park and the DRI created a park and ride at Wiregrass, but we would also use the FDOT built bus bays along Bruce B. Downs corridor and providing hourly service along Bruce B. Downs. So let's talk about what the performance of the Route 51 is currently, and we also need to talk about the 20X. It's the Pasco Lutz Express. The reason I bring this route up today is because we have to adjust some of the funding, reallocate some of the funding from the 20X into the new 275 program, and that's why we've been working with our FDOT partners to allow us to maneuver those funds. But we want to talk about the performance of that 20X as well, because we're not going to negatively impact that route. We're actually enhancing that route in the February service change. So both of these routes, the 51 LX and the 20X, are currently funded through our urban corridor program. The Route 51 LX is continuing to decline in performance, so it's not performing well, and I'll talk about some of the numbers here in a second. But the Route 20X, the other part of this program, is performing very well. This is our #1 express route right now, with 2 trips in the morning and 2 trips in the afternoon. It's operating about 30 patrons per service hour. So since this is FDOT funded, we wanted to collaborate with FDOT and ask them about extending this route to MacDill Air Force Base. So in addition to the Route 24 LX and the 25 LX that serves out in the Brandon Bloomingdale area and the Riverview Fishhawk area, we would also serve the MacDill Air Force Base from the northern portion, from Pasco through the northern portion of the county to downtown and then to MacDill Air Force Base. So an additional connection to the Air Force Base. So the Route 20X is performing really well. Post-Mission Max is definitely one of the successes that came from the Mission Max implementation. If the trend continues for the 20X for the first 3 months of service, we would perform about 25,000 passengers annually for this route, surpassing anything that's been accomplished for this route since 2010. So really good numbers there. The Route 51LX, on the other end, this isn't performing very well. It's about 8.5 passengers per revenue hour for that route. So in retrospect, compared to the 20X is doing very well. Top performer, 51LX is not doing so well. So let's talk about the scenarios. Scenario 1 is the fully implemented route all the way from the Wesley Chapel Park and Ride, going along the Bruce B. Downs corridor, Bruce B. Downs Boulevard corridor, serving those bus bays along that route. There's about half a dozen in each direction along bus bays along that corridor that have been built. It would also continue to serve the Lowe's Park and Ride that's currently served by the 51LX, and it would travel all the way down Bruce B. Downs to University Area Transit Center. From University Area Transit Center, it would get on the interstate to go to downtown and serve Marion Transit Center. Then it would get back on the interstate and go to the airport. So this is the full route that for scenario 1. This would run hourly from 6 to 10, so it would be have a really good span of service, because through Mission Max we wanted to try to get every single route at least 6 to 10. That's a big core of our service through Mission Max. It was expanding spans of service 7 days a week that has those 6 to 10 spans of service. So this would be a 7-day-a-week route, and right now the projected cost is about $1.4 million for this route. Scenario 2 would be a little modification to this route. We would not go to the airport with this route. So the only portion from downtown to the airport would not be there. So we currently have an hourly connection to the airport from downtown with the Route 60LX. So that is currently there. If we implemented scenario 1, we could alternate the 60LX and the 275 to provide half-hourly service to the airport. With scenario 2, the connection to the airport would be in downtown, and it's at about $300,000 worth of savings for that scenario. And it would also connect with the Route 30 at Marion Transit Center as well. Scenario 3 is a little bit of a hybrid of shortening the weekday routing or the weekend routing. So Monday through Friday would be the full route going to the airport, 6 to 10 hourly service. But on the weekends, we would provide that hourly service along the Bruce B. Downs corridor from the Wiregrass Park and Ride to the University Area Transit Center along Bruce B. Downs. And that's about $1.3 million of service. All 3 of these plans, they leverage the local investment that FDOT has put into the bus bays along that corridor. So we would use those bus bays for this route. We have that brand new developed park and ride. We call it the Wiregrass Park and Ride. It's situated between the shops at Wiregrass and the Florida Hospital. I don't know, I forget what the number of parking spots is, but it's a very big park and ride, and we hope to serve it with more service. The roadway expansion along Bruce B. Downs is continuing today. There's a lot of construction along that corridor, so hopefully that gets wrapped up this year. But the roadways have been expanded. We've got a brand new, beautiful park and ride up there, and the bus bays along the route are great to serve it with transit. Funding sources. As I stated before, both of those routes, the 51LX and the 20X, are funded through the urban corridor funds. So we're asking to move some of those funds over to fund both the 20X and the proposed 275LX. Annually, we get about $241,000 for the 20X and $412,000 for the 51LX. Both of these routes, they are underspending what their allotted funding is from those grants. So we do have some funds in reserve to allow us to transition some of those funds from the 20X, and this year and next year's worth of service, we can fund both of these routes, any of those scenarios, scenario 1, 2, or 3. And again, that's with the additional service to MacDill Air Force Base with the Route 20X. And then in fiscal year 20, we would reapply through FDOT and request more funds to continue both of those routes. So let's talk about some of the impacts to current riders if we implemented this plan with the 275. The Route 20X, there's no impact to those riders. They're actually getting enhanced service going to MacDill Air Force Base, and that extension is going to occur on February 25th with those service changes. The 51LX right now is 2 morning trips and 2 afternoon trips, separated about half hour's worth of frequency, and approximately 15 to 20 passengers daily ride that route. So if we did implement an hourly service, there would be a little bit more, there would be a half hour more gap from one trip to another. The 51LX currently serves the Temple Terrace City Hall stop only in the morning. Right now, that deviation to go serve that bus stop, it's only averaging about 6 passengers for those two deviations on those 2 a.m. trips. So the ridership at that stop has declined. So there are some alternatives for the Temple Terrace City stop. Even if we implemented the Route 275LX and would not go to Temple Terrace City Hall, the Route 6 for the February service change is going to 15 minutes of frequency. So they're going to have a lot more frequent buses that go through that area by the Temple Terrace City Hall. In addition to the University area hyperlink service and the Temple Terrace hyperlink service to get to that stop. The comparable trip time from the express service to the local service on the Route 6, it takes about 30 minutes to get from Temple Terrace City Hall to Marion Transit Center, and it's about 45 minutes on the Route 6 to get there. So it's about 15 minutes worth of additional travel time using the local route versus the express route. As I talked about earlier, all 3 of those scenarios that we presented here today, they're the estimated T-best modeling that we have shows that ridership would be over 200,000 riders per year. Now again, that's very ambitious for year 1 on a very new developed route, but we would do some marketing elements to boost that ridership and make the public aware of what we are doing. So it will take time to develop the ridership. And one way to help develop that ridership is through the marketing and make it aware to the public. The marketing elements can include multiple sources such as printed material on board the vehicles, newspapers, and kiosks, and shelters along the route. Digital audio marketing can include onboard vehicle announcements and radio announcements. Online media outlets can include our website, social media, and such targeted advertisement through iHeartMedia and Google. And if the approval today to go to the public outreach is approved, we would build it. We have our outreach schedule here. In February and March, we would do public outreach. We would post the plan on the HART website. We would have staff ride on board the 51LX to notify them of upcoming public hearings and outreaches. Some of the areas that we would do these outreaches at or in Temple Terrace at the park and ride there at the Temple Terrace City Hall. We could utilize the park and ride up there at Wiregrass to discuss the plan with those folks up there. We would partner with the new Tampa Library and do some outreach sessions out there. And we would look at schools and other community centers and partner with them to go out there and talk to them and reach out to those folks. With a public hearing sometime in late March, and we'll go over the rest of the timeline in a later slide. So we heard our presentation regarding the regional plan. So the regional plan continues to move along, and it's as it works in defining ways to connect our future regional transportation. The route could prove valuable, this Route 275LX, in addition with the 60LX that we're currently operating and the 360LX. As we gather data on these major, these limited express routes that hit these major hubs along the way, we can collect this data and use it to our advantage as we look at FTA funding in the future for a possible regional connected program. So let's talk about some of the comparisons with the regional plan. The Route 275LX is not a replacement for what is being recommended from the regional plan. The 275LX does not have the connection to Pinellas as either one of these plans either terminates at the airport or downtown Tampa. Also, the 275LX does not have the high-frequency BRT-like aspects that the regional plan is proposing. And 275LX, through this plan and partnering with our partners at FDOT, we can implement this route this summer, for the summer service change. So here's the timeline that we are proposing. And last week, we presented this plan at the Legislative Strategic Planning Committee. Today, we're here at the board meeting presenting on the plan and asking for approval to do public outreach. In February and March, we would conduct that public outreach. In April, we would bring back to the committee what was heard through that public outreach process and present those findings to the committee and that recommended alternative. In May, for the board of directors meeting, we would ask to approve any of the alternatives that came out of all that public outreach. Once it's approved, if any of the scenarios are approved by the board, we would take that resolution and present it to FDOT. Then they would work with us to transition the money from the 20X funds and roll it into the 275LX funds so that we can fund both of those routes and the recommended alternative. And then in July of 2018, the summer service change, we would be able to implement any of the alternatives if approved.
I'd just like to move approval.
Second.
Were you done?
Yes, sir.
Okay, there's a motion by Commissioner Kim. Who seconded it? Okay, second.
And I have some comments to make about this. This is exactly what we should be doing. And it's low cost, and it's an express bus, and it goes, with few stops when it goes over long regional pulls, and it's less cost. It's a good taxpayer investment. I think it's interesting that this route, and by the way, as I confirmed, because this is the second time I saw the presentation, FDOT is providing the funds for this route instead of other less effective routes. Correct?
Correct.
I think we should go for the full, weekend and half-hour or hourly service into the airport. But I wanted to point out that they call it the I-275, but if you notice from Wesley Chapel down to USF, it doesn't take I-275. It takes a much better route through Bristby down to the university area, and that's what I mean when I say that we should be using wise BRT opportunities like that could develop a corridor, bring economic benefit, and this is exactly the kind of corridor we should be having instead of on I-275, and I'm assuming the reason you pull it down through there is because the ridership numbers are showing much better than it would be if it was on 275, and serving, as I understand, some of the hospital needs there too. So I just thank you. I think this is a great plan.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? I'm sorry, Councilwoman.
I will tell you that the reason ridership dropped in Temple Terrace is because no one wanted to get on the interstate. So, as you know, you've had to increase 6. So that's where they went. Yeah. They went to 6. So anyone who wants to take this to the airport would be happy to use as you know, Temple Terrace has embraced the Tesla with open arms. So I think this is a great alternative. I'm delighted, and if anybody's ready, I'm ready to we move forward on this. I do have a question. Does staff have a recommendation of scenario 1, 2, and 3?
I would recommend the full route. I mean, to maximize the use of the funds, if the funding allows, and we can get everything worked out with FDOT, I would recommend the scenario 1. There are some logistics at the airport that we need to work with, having an additional vehicle go there. They're opening up the rental car center on February 14th. Right now, we've been serving that area. We have multiple routes that go there now compared to just one route before Mission Max. The rental car center is going to be mixed use, and that's a little bit concerning for operations, but we're going to work with the airport and work with them to find the best solution that we can, and then we're going to make our recommendations from there.
So I'm not sure now that you've answered me, which one are you supporting?
I support going to the airport. I think,
3.
but we just got to figure out the logistics of the bus stop there.
But 3.
Scenario 1. Scenario 1.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I understand his recommendation of scenario 1 is not a part of the motion. Okay.
It was not, but I'd be more than happy to make it.
Well, I think we want to take all.
Oh, no, we want to take all three scenarios
okay.
to the public for public comment and outreach.
In that case, I move to. I ask for board approval to conduct public outreach.
Well, we already have a motion.
This is my motion.
We already have
to
one.
move forward.
We already have one.
I'm sorry.
There's a motion by Commissioner Kemp, second by Mr. Hart.
Oh, sorry. In that case, I support your motion.
Are there any further
We're
discussion?
both ready to go here.
Enjoy your support.
Seeing none, all those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise. Motion is adopted. We now revert back to FDOT analysis of Metro Rapid.
I just want to add, he had me at 100% funded.
Good morning.
Yes. A to B. Okay.
Good morning, board members. I'll let you guys set up here.
Thank you.
We all set? Yeah. Okay. Good morning. My name is Christopher Cochran. I am the manager of planning out of the Service Development Department. This morning, I'm here to tell you about a study opportunity with our partner FDOT to study a opportunity to create some more BRT like services in the Metro Rapid corridor. I do want to emphasize up front and all that we've talked about this morning to make it very clear that this is this study is not looking at anything that necessarily overlaps the regional transit feasibility plan. This is really looking at a more local street level study that parallels the regional transit feasibility plan in both the Nebraska and Florida corridors. So the study overview here is really looking at this study that is 100% FDO funded, looking at the Metro Rapid and Florida and Fowler corridors, and really studying opportunities to make this a more robust BRT service. In addition, I'll talk a little bit about our goal, and this is to come out of it with a FTA grant application. So getting into the funding of this study, currently these study dollars are in the FDOT work program for the amount of $2.5 million. And again, it is 100% funded by DOT, and there would be no funding match necessary from the HART side. And our idea here is to have a relatively aggressive timeline in that they are looking to encumber and get these funds started spending in this fiscal year. And as such, we have some concurrent efforts to going on to encumber that funding and get this program, get this study started. So I'm going to go over the study corridors and the scopes with you. First of all, we're looking at the existing Metro Rapid corridor, both north and south along Nebraska Avenue between downtown and the Fowler and Fowler Avenue. It would look at Florida Avenue between downtown and Fowler, and then look at Fowler Avenue itself going east-west between 275, where it would meet Florida and Nebraska and the university area. In addition, the study scope would include the exploration of facility enhancement opportunities that would include but not necessarily be limited to exclusive guideways, Q-jump lanes, and traffic signal priority, just to name a few. The scope of the services that we're looking as part of this study is to include design and engineering. And with the funding available, we believe we'd be able to get engineering to close to the 70 to 90% level, and really ultimately take this study to the FTA Small Starts application process. And I think one of the unique opportunities we have here to take into consideration is the fact that we already have $32 million invested in the Metro Rapid corridor that we would be able to look at how we can include that as our match towards an FTA Small Starts application. Again, to go over this proposed timetable for this study to get it going. February here, we would look to have our scope approved by FDOT and begin drafting an RFP. In March, we would look to have that RFP published and on the street. In April, we'd have some pre-bid processes if applicable. And then by early May, we'd be receiving bids and conducting staff and committee reviews and scoring on those RFP submittals as well. Ultimately, in late May, the presentation of our selected recommendations to board committees, and then a June approval of any contract opportunities by you all, by the board, and then look at final products to be delivered to us within 18 to 20 months. As far as the final deliverables, we're looking for study corridor recommendations and looking at what are those facility enhancements that can be made in that corridor to bring it to BRT level or as close as possible. Design and engineering to be included as process to be included as well, and ultimately the FTA grant application as well. So that's a brief overview of what we're looking for in this study, and I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Councilman Suarez.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your brevity. And I'm going to try and be as short as you were. This is the kind of presentation we should have had first before we had the other feasibility study, because this shows a lot of stuff that we need to do on our end that is going to help, add grade for some of this BRT stuff. Now, the question I have in terms of the scope of the study, are you going to include, some of the properties that are around there? How we might be able to find developers or to find owners that are around these specific areas that we might want to talk to and contract with to actually develop stations. And then thirdly, and I think most importantly, is are you going to have discussions with both FDOT and with the county about dedicating a lane for use by the BRT, because you put in your presentation very, very smartly BRT-like conditions. Is there a way that we can look at this study as a way to look at it as BRT and not without the like in there? So
yes, sir. And to your point, I think in all that we've seen today, I think it would be prudent of us to take some of the things that we've heard today and your concerns and work on the scope that we deliver to FDOT, and that we can work into our RFP as well to ensure that your concerns are met and that we're doing it the best that we can appropriately.
I appreciate that. I'll make a motion to move forward with this project.
I'll second.
There's a motion by Councilman Suarez, second by Commissioner Kemp. Commissioner Kemp is recognized.
Thank you. I'll be quick because most of it's been said and you've heard it earlier. This is the kind of BRT-like, and it's okay. I think it's okay to be BRT-like if the road doesn't support anything more. It wasn't even near BRT-like up on the expressways, but this is exactly, again, what we need to be doing. I'm just wondering, will there be, and again, incorporating the land use, the transit-oriented development as part of it, the economic opportunities as part of it, as I've seen them do in studies in so many other places. But I'm wondering, is there opportunities, just because this is drawn this way, is there opportunities for also a shorter BRT route through that, like I'm thinking across Hillsborough or, where there is more density for a faster circulator?
Well, again, this being a study, we have it's the opportunity for us to take this feedback and develop that RFP process appropriately. So we're ensuring that we are. TOD is obviously a serious concern for the board, and it needs to be something that needs to be looked at in the study. And again, the study isn't necessarily just have to be that single specific line. It can look at the corridor. That's why it's a corridor and not necessarily just a single line.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Suarez, second by Commissioner Kemp. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Motion is adopted. Thank you, sir. We move now to the consent agenda, items A, B. We do not need to vote on C because it's already been approved, and items D and E. So it's A, B, D, and E.
Chair, I'd move to approve A, B, D, and E.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion to approve A, B, D, and E. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise. The motion is adopted. Now we're moving to the interim chief executive report. Mr. Seward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will abbreviate.
Excuse me, hold on one second. We just lost a quorum.
Yes, sir.
But we have nothing else to vote on. Am I correct?
I do not see anything else.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you. All right, go ahead.
I'll start with a quick high-speed ferry project update, and it's really more not an update of the project itself, but based on the conversation that occurred at the January Board of County Commissioners meeting concerning the ferry grant. To be frank, I walked away a little concerned that if there was anyone that wasn't familiar with the effort or the grant or the funding, they would not have realized how involved HART's board is as far as the funding is concerned. So I wanted to just quickly provide the board just a quick informational update on the history of that grant funding and how it affects this board. Back in 2013, we agreed with Hillsborough County to apply for 5307 discretionary passenger ferry transportation funding for a high-speed ferry between South County and MacDill Air Force Base. We asked for $9,150,000. In 2014, HART was awarded $4,772,755 as a direct recipient of these funds in support of that high-speed ferry project. In 2015, in this very room, the FTA regional administrator, Dr. Yvette Taylor, sat and talked with HART senior executive staff and reiterated again that this is HART's grant. HART alone is responsible for the accountability of that grant, the use of the grant, the timeliness of the grant, as well as the responsibility for the 30-year commitment of infrastructure assets that would be built from this grant. From that meeting, we developed a high-level project plan with the county, provided that to the FTA. Something else that occurred in that 2015 meeting was a requirement of the FTA to have monthly conference calls. And we have had them since that time for almost the last 2.5 years with the FTA, HART staff, myself or Mr. Campello have been involved, as well as county staff. 2015 through the summer of 2017, a couple of issues slowed the project, deciding on exactly what the match would come from, the local match, deciding on exactly how to move forward with the necessary environmental protocols that are required of any type of federal match or federal funding. The FTA wasn't happy with the progress. So they summoned HART leadership. It was myself, the county attorney of Hillsborough County, county staff, and the HNTB contractor. We were summoned to Atlanta to give a face-to-face update again on the ferry project. We did so. They were pleased with the project plan that was provided to the FTA by the county and HNTB. Fast forward to 2017, winter of. FTA requested an update based on that June-July trip, June I believe. Reminded HART again that we are the ones accountable for this ferry, for this project, for the use of the funds. These funds expire in September of 2019. And what I mean by expire, we have not drawn upon those funds. Those funds aren't sitting in a HART bank account. They are awaiting the completion of the proper environmental protocols, an environmental report or NEPA, to be able to have HART draw upon those to provide the infrastructure for the project. So my concern with the ferry grant, and it has been since the beginning, is that irrespective of any other governing body, their desire, their project plan, their administration's discussion of the grant, the accountability of the grant falls solely back on this board and this leadership. And I don't think that has been made explicitly clear through this entire process. So it's important to understand that FTA doesn't look at the BOCC, doesn't look at the city of Tampa, it looks at HART as a sole responsible party for, 1, the use of the funds, 2, the timely use of the funds, and 3, the firm understanding that if and when that any of that money gets spent, HART is responsible for tracking those assets for the life of those assets, which would be up to 30 years. So the FTA also reminded me very recently that if for whatever reason we move forward and we were able to construct, and 5 years from now, 6 years from now, there suddenly was no longer either local funding or a desire for the ferry itself, HART is responsible for the repayback of those federal funds. Not unlike downstairs with the streetcar. If we suddenly decided today to do away with the streetcar, HART would ultimately be responsible for repaying those federal funds. As a payback option, I was reminded that they could also take our federal Formula 5307 funding over a period of time. As you may recall, we rely very heavily on that 5307 funding to run service. So down the road, it's troublesome that could happen. I'm simply telling you this today as it is coming up again at the BOCC meeting on, I believe, the 21st for further discussion. I will come back after that board meeting with a report to you all on exactly where we're moving forward. Again, this isn't a discussion on the validity of the project, on the necessary functions of the project. It's the fact that we, HART, are responsible for that funding, and I don't think it has been clearly made clear to the board since we received that funding in 2014, and that was my goal of presenting that to you today.
Thank you, sir. Can I ask you a question? Depending on what happens with the ferry issue, the ferry project, depending on what happens on the 21st, depending on what happens down the road, is there any way we could repurpose that grant?
Yes, sir. After discussions with the FTA actually over the last couple of years, as long as what you're asking for the money to be repurposed for was within the original application that was submitted by HART, we absolutely can.
So, for instance, is there anything in the original application such as buying the boats themselves?
No.
No, okay.
But route specific, there is discussion of additional routes, even the Tampa to St. Petersburg Crossbay Ferry option. So those components are in the original application, and it requires, what it will require, if that is the direction, it will have to come from HART to FTA requesting a repurposing of those dollars with a proposed plan to get the money spent, or at least accessed by September of 2019.
Okay. Commissioner Kemp, be recognized.
Thank you. I'd just like to be clear that I did raise this at the Board of County Commissioners to kind of carry the water, so to speak, on the ferry project. And we did take a 5-to-1, I think it was a 5-to-1 vote in the last few weeks to move this along to really re-examine whether, to see if we could get the possibility of the federal funds separated from the site, because that would be problematic and hold any ferry opportunities up for 5 to 6, 7, 8 years. And we saw real issues with that. It's been an issue. And the county commission voted and they want to see the ferry project moving forward. I had raised it at that time to really look at whether we should be looking at these, again, federal funds attached to the site, or as was pointed out, that maybe we can forego those at this point. And once we develop the projects, we could then apply for the federal funds, and they could be used for other purposes within a regional ferry project. So I think we can. They're working on that now at the county commission, and it's actually to speed up a project and get it on the table here, and do what we can to make the most cost-effective project. And again, I wanted to say this is one of the only regional 3P transit projects that we have. And HMS Ferries, who does the ferry service in New York, Seattle, everywhere else, a really top-notch company. This is the only market that they've ever agreed to take the risk of operating loss, so that we aren't on the hook for operations, which is stunning and amazing, because that's usually the big problem with these transit projects. It's a great opportunity for us. We have water, unlike Denver and Austin and Atlanta. We can do something, and this is a really exciting opportunity. So thanks. And I just wanted to reiterate, too, the absolutely correct rundown on where we stand.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Some collaboration news. Memphis Transit Authority, they have a rail streetcar system much like ours. I have worked with their CEO in an agreement to help train their staff on the operation of their cars, which are just like ours. They are going to be here in Tampa, I believe, a week from today. And in turn, we are going to be sending some of our folks to Memphis to help train on the maintenance side of the house, all at their expense. So it's a good cooperative agreement between us and Memphis. The next item, we are trying to accommodate a demonstration of electric vehicles. And due to some scheduling issues, we have had to bump that around a couple of times. I think we are now moving that to April, which aligns to Earth Day. We'll have more details as that comes out. An initiative that we have forthcoming from our executive staff, thank you, Lena, is an updating and moving to electronic board packets. So eventually these will become way of the dinosaur, and we will have everything online, including the backups. For staff, internal staff, it's a review process and approval process. So we're moving forward with that. In your packets, you have a TBARTA draft MOU for the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. I only provide that to you as I will be working with those organizations on exactly what that language looks like. Nothing for you to act on today. We'll be bringing that back probably within the next 30 or 60 days for your comments. Our scorecard, as an update, we have been providing an update. It is in tab number 4 and number 5 of your packets. We will be reporting that out each month. From that same January BOCC meeting, Commissioner Merman, and I'm sorry she is not here to hear this, she made a recommendation to the BOCC to have county-funded analysis or review of potential revenue sources for HART. What I'd like to share with you is the fact that we are working with the MPO, and the MPO is willing to study fund a study for us to look at sustainable, non-taxable revenues. Exactly what Commissioner Merman had requested. We have moved this forward now that that request has been made. I will be talking about this with the county administrator at a meeting with him next week. The fact that we won't have to look for county funding for anything like this. We do have the MPO with the ability to do that study for us. And then last but not least, the upcoming calendar. March, we are planning on a light board agenda. I will be in Paraguay visiting my daughter, who I've not seen in a year, in the Peace Corps. Ms. Lee will be sitting up here.
We're not going to have a board meeting in Paraguay?
We can.
We could check out their bus rapid transit. It's good.
Mr. Campello will be giving you an update on Flamingo, as well as your own personalized Flamingo card to use on our transit system and a demo of the technology. April board is pretty heavy. I promise you an overview of our paratransit process from a citizen signing up for the service, to booking, to scheduling, to picking up and dropping off. We're going to create a little vignette for you where we're going to walk somebody through the entire process for you to see. Our environmental program update, again, because it's Earth Day that month, we're also going to provide you a Mission Max update on where we are as far as ridership, as far as our cost savings. And then a high-level budget discussion. Yep, it's that time again. So we will start at a very high level of talking about revenues, potential revenues for next year, additional expenses, TDP, and so on. I'm complete.
Very good. Any questions?
I'm sorry to take it longer, but this is something I've been concerned about. The financing, what you had said Commissioner Merman had requested in terms of financing. I just want to be sure because, as you know, back some time ago, I requested that there be a presentation. I understand it was prepared but never presented. And I'd just like to make sure that this is part of it, where we look at how other transit agencies in Florida and around the nation fund their transit. As I've said before, there's only 2 in Florida that funded by ad valorem tax, and that's Hillsborough and Pinellas. There's only 1 county with a sales tax, a half cent, in Miami-Dade, that's it. Everyone else in Florida is countywide taxes. A lot of other places, they have much more state support for transit. So would this include that kind of...
It will.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
A contrast and comparison across the country.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
I have no report, so General Counsel, you have a report.
I have no report either, except that we will have to leave in 10 minutes for a conflict if we're still here.
I'm going to try to get us out of here in 10 minutes. I want to get out of this early. Public input. The only person I have is Karen Mikowski. Hope I pronounced that right. Karen Mikowski.
She's gone.
Pardon?
She got to go to work.
Well, she's back, so she didn't go to work. Good morning.
Good morning. Karen Mahosky, 7903 West Whitewater Court. Sorry. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that the state is doing, and I'm not sure if you guys independently with who you're representing or as citizens, they're considering putting a constitutional amendment for voting, which would take away local rule. So that means state is going to be deciding transit, land use, everything. So you as a board, we would not be having this discussion that you just so passionately had, and I, as a transit advocate, would not be here to, push for my transit routes. Also, the state is looking to be voting on a tax, which would be limiting local communities for taxing. So, as Commissioner Pat Kemp just stated that, HART, you guys are funded by a tax. If you ever wanted to increase that, that would be taken away. Also, you independently representing your city and your county, municipalities would not be able to amend that. So I hope that you're going to be taking, whether you have lobbyists or you as citizens, to fight those laws at the state level. I also believe that there's a Senate and a House bill also trying to take away local law. So that's why I just wanted to point out to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Oh, I was just going to add, I'm so happy about all the new, the 250 going through 275, yeah. So great job.
Anyone else? What's to address the board? Is there any old business? Any new business? We'll adjourn. It's getting tough. Sorry. Same thing comes to this week. Same thing. We can cut the variance. Sounds like